She took the most dangerous job at the feared billionaire's house, and her life changed completely. You're going to destroy her, aren't you? Just like you destroyed all the others. Rue Calloway stood in the doorway of Dashiell Hargrove's study, her resignation letter trembling in her hand, watching the man she'd foolishly fallen in love with stare at her with eyes colder than the Pacific Ocean, raging against the cliffs below. I don't destroy people, Miss Calloway. Dashiell's voice was quiet, controlled, lethal. They destroy themselves by getting too close. Then maybe I should have listened to the warnings. Maybe I should have walked away when I had the chance. But you didn't. He turned from the window, his silhouette backlit by lightning that split the sky. You stayed. And now you know too much. Now you've seen too much. Now you're just like all the rest. No. Her voice cracked but didn't break. I'm nothing like the rest. Because unlike them, I actually saw you. The real you. The man behind all this ice and cruelty. And that terrifies you more than anything else, doesn't it? Get out. Make me. The space between them crackled with something dangerous, something that tasted like rage and heartbreak, and a love neither of them knew how to name. Have you ever been so desperate that you'd walk into a situation everyone warned you about? Have you ever needed something so badly that you ignored every red flag, every cautionary tale, every voice screaming at you to run? Have you ever stood at the edge of disaster and jumped anyway, just hoping you'd learn to fly on the way down? This is the story of how I did exactly that. How I took a job that had destroyed 6 people before me. How I walked into the home of a man they called the architect of ruin. How I survived in a house that held secrets darker than the ocean below its cliffs. They said Dashiell Hargrove was untouchable, unreachable, unbreakable. They were wrong. But discovering the truth almost killed us both. Before we get into this story, I need you to do something for me. Drop a comment right now telling me where you're watching from, your city, your country, anywhere in the world. And hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow I have another story that's going to blow your mind. And you don't want to miss it for anything, seriously. Tomorrow's story is even more intense than this one. Now, let's get into how a desperate woman and a damaged billionaire collided in the most unexpected way possible. The rain hammered against the windows of the Portland Employment Services office like it was trying to break through, trying to drown everyone inside. Rue Calloway sat in a plastic chair that had seen better days, staring at a job posting that everyone else in the room was deliberately avoiding. The posting had been pinned to the board for 4 months. 4 months of desperate job seekers walking past it like it carried a plague. 4 months of whispered warnings and knowing looks from the employment counselors. Private estate curator and household manager needed. Competitive salary. Housing included. References required. Apply in person only. The address listed was Hargrove Manor, perched on the cliffs of the Oregon coast, 3 hours from anywhere that mattered. Rue had heard the stories. Everyone in the Pacific Northwest had heard the stories. Miss Calloway. The voice belonged to Patricia Drummond, the employment counselor who'd been trying to help Rue find work for the past 3 months. Patricia was in her 50s, with kind eyes that had seen too much disappointment. I really think you should consider the position at the hotel in Seaside. It's not as much money, but it's stable, and they specifically said they liked your resume. How much does it pay? $32,000 a year. Rue looked back at the Hargrove Manor posting. The salary listed was $95,000, plus room and board. And the Hargrove position? Patricia's expression shifted, sympathy mixing with something that looked like fear. Miss Calloway, I really don't think that's a good fit for you. You didn't answer my question. The salary is as listed, $95,000, but there's a reason that posting has been up for 4 months. There's a reason 6 qualified candidates have left that position in the past 18 months. What reason? Patricia leaned closer, lowering her voice, even though they were the only 2 people in the room. Dashiell Hargrove is not a kind man. He's brilliant, yes. Successful, absolutely. His private art collection is worth hundreds of millions. But he's also demanding, controlling, and according to every person who's worked for him, emotionally brutal. Emotionally brutal how? He expects perfection. Anything less, and he makes your life hell until you quit. The longest anyone has lasted is 8 weeks. Most don't make it past 2. Rue thought about the eviction notice folded in her jacket pocket. She thought about her mother, hiding in a town whose name Rue wasn't allowed to know, protected by federal marshals because she'd witnessed something she shouldn't have. She thought about the medical bills that kept coming, the debt that kept growing, the future that kept shrinking. What if I'm different? What if I can handle him? Patricia studied her for a long moment. Why would you want to? Why would anyone deliberately walk into that situation? Because I don't have a choice. We always have choices, Miss Calloway. Do we? Rue's voice was harder now, edged with the desperation she'd been trying to hide. Do we really? Because from where I'm sitting, my choices are taking a job that pays poverty wages and watching my mother die because I can't afford her medication, or taking a risk on something that might actually give us both a future. The Hargrove position isn't a future. It's a trap. Then maybe I'm good at escaping traps. Patricia sighed, recognizing the look in Rue's eyes. She'd seen it before, the expression of someone who'd run out of safe options and was ready to gamble everything on a dangerous one. If you're determined to do this, I should tell you what I know. The manor itself is isolated. No close neighbors, no easy transportation to town. Mr. Hargrove values his privacy above almost everything else. He's also deeply involved in the art world, both legitimate galleries and private collecting. Your job would be to manage his household staff, which currently consists of a head housekeeper, a groundskeeper, and rotating contractors. But you'd also be responsible for cataloging and maintaining his private collection. That doesn't sound so terrible. The collection is where things get complicated. Some of the pieces have histories, dark histories. There are rumors that Dashiell's father acquired certain works through less than legal means. Nothing proven, but whispers. And Dashiell is obsessive about protecting his father's legacy. Is he dangerous? Physically, I mean. Patricia hesitated. Not that I've heard. The danger isn't physical violence. It's psychological. He gets inside your head. He finds your weaknesses and exploits them. He makes you doubt yourself until you can't remember why you thought you were qualified for anything. Sounds like someone who's been hurt and learned to hurt first. Maybe. Patricia pulled out a form, but that doesn't make him any less dangerous. If you're really going to do this, I need you to understand what you're walking into. This isn't just a difficult boss. This is someone who will test you in ways you can't imagine. Someone who will push you to your breaking point just to see if you'll break. Rue took the form, her hand steady despite the tremor in her chest. When can I interview? The interview is tomorrow. 10 a.m. sharp. Do not be late. Dashiell Hargrove hates lateness more than almost anything. What does he hate most? Liars. People who pretend to be something they're not. People who want something from him beyond what they're willing to admit. Then I'll be honest. Honesty might not be enough. It's all I have. That night, Rue sat in the studio apartment she'd be evicted from in 2 weeks, researching everything she could find about Dashiell Hargrove and his infamous manor. The facts were impressive and disturbing in equal measure. Dashiell had inherited Hargrove Industries at 28 when his father, Cornelius Hargrove, died in a boating accident off the coast of the estate. In the 15 years since, he'd tripled the company's value, expanded into international markets, and become one of the most respected and feared figures in the Pacific Northwest business community. But it was his personal life that fascinated the internet. Dashiell never appeared at social functions, never gave interviews, never allowed photographers near the estate. The few images available showed a man in his early 40s, tall and lean, with dark hair going silver at the temples and eyes the color of a winter sky. There were rumors about his father's death. Whispers that it hadn't been an accident, that Cornelius had been involved in something illegal and paid the price. But nothing was ever proven, and the investigation had gone cold years ago. The art collection was legendary. Pieces spanning centuries, from Renaissance masters to contemporary provocateurs. But there were gaps in the provenance of certain works, questions about how a businessman from Oregon had acquired paintings that museums had been searching for. And then there were the employees. Rue found an online forum where former household staff posted anonymously about their experiences. The stories were chilling in their consistency. He watches everything. You can't move a book an inch without him noticing. He doesn't yell. That would be easier. He just looks at you with those cold eyes and tells you exactly how you've disappointed him. I lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks of feeling like I was walking on glass, waiting for the moment I'd slip and cut myself open. But there were other comments too, buried among the warnings. Sometimes I caught him staring at a painting like it was the only thing keeping him alive. Once I heard him playing piano at 3 in the morning. The music was the saddest thing I'd ever heard. He's not cruel because he enjoys it. He's cruel because he doesn't know how to be anything else. Rue closed her laptop and stared out the window at the Portland skyline, rain streaking the glass like tears. Tomorrow she would drive 3 hours to the edge of the continent. Tomorrow she would walk into the home of a man who destroyed everyone who got close. Tomorrow she would gamble her future on the possibility that she could be different, that she could survive where others had failed. She thought about her mother, recovering in some protected location, depending on Rue to handle the medical bills and the life they'd had to abandon. She thought about the witness protection marshals who'd made it clear that any high-profile job could compromise her mother's safety. But what choice did she have? Survival required risk. Hope required courage. And sometimes, the most dangerous path was the only one that led anywhere worth going. She would take the job. She would walk into Dashiell Hargrove's world and find a way to navigate it. She would be stronger than the others, smarter, more resilient. She had to be. Because the alternative was giving up, and Rue Calloway had never learned how to do that. The coastal highway stretched before Rue like a promise and a threat, winding along cliffs where the Pacific Ocean threw itself against ancient rocks with relentless fury. She'd left Portland at 6:30 a.m., giving herself extra time in case of weather or wrong turns. And now, at 9:15, she was pulling through gates that looked like they belonged to a fortress. The gates were iron, 15 feet tall, topped with decorative spikes that seemed more functional than aesthetic. They opened automatically as she approached, some sensor detecting her arrival, and closed behind her with a finality that made her stomach clench. The driveway curved through grounds that were beautiful in a severe, controlled way. Everything was precisely maintained. Trees pruned to exact specifications, lawns cut to uniform height, flower beds displaying blooms in carefully coordinated colors. Nothing wild, nothing spontaneous, nothing that suggested nature was allowed to have its own opinion. And then the house came into view. And Rue understood why they called it a manor instead of just a mansion. The structure was massive, a combination of old-world Gothic architecture and brutal modern design. The original building looked like it had been standing for 100 years, all stone and towers and windows that watched like eyes. But additions had been made, glass and steel extensions that jutted from the historic structure like crystalline growths. It should have looked wrong, this marriage of ancient and contemporary. Instead, it looked intentional, as if the building itself was a statement about refusing to choose between past and future. Rue parked in the circular drive, next to a fountain where stone angels poured water from urns. The angels' faces were turned away, as if they couldn't bear to look at the house they guarded. The front door opened before she could knock, revealing a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair pulled into a bun so tight it looked painful. She wore a black dress that might have been a uniform or might have just been her personal style, and her expression was carefully neutral. Miss Calloway. The woman's voice was crisp, efficient, giving nothing away. I'm Iris Pemberton, head of household. Mr. Hargrove is expecting you. Thank you. Rue extended her hand, but Iris just looked at it for a moment before turning and walking into the house. The interior took Rue's breath away. The foyer soared 3 stories, with a staircase that curved like a sculpture. The walls were covered in art, paintings of every era and style, each one museum quality. The floor was marble, polished to a mirror shine, and the chandelier overhead looked like it weighed more than Rue's car. Please follow me. Iris moved through the space like a ghost, her footsteps silent despite the hard floor. Mr. Hargrove is in the gallery. He prefers to conduct interviews there. They walked through rooms that felt more like museum exhibits than living spaces. Everything was perfect, precisely arranged, touched by money and taste in equal measure. But there was something missing, something Rue couldn't quite name. It took her several rooms to realize what it was. There were no personal photographs, no casual clutter, no signs that anyone actually lived here. The gallery occupied the entire east wing of the manor, Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the ocean, and the walls displayed artwork that made Rue's art history degree suddenly feel relevant. She recognized a Caravaggio, a Vermeer, a Turner. She saw contemporary pieces by artists whose work sold for millions. She saw sculptures that belonged in the Louvre and tapestries that looked medieval. And standing in the center of it all, staring at a painting of a shipwreck, was Dashiell Hargrove. The photographs hadn't done him justice. He was taller than she'd expected, maybe 6'3", with a lean build that suggested discipline rather than vanity. His dark hair was indeed silvering at the temples, and he wore it slightly longer than current fashion, brushing his collar. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, expensive in the way that whispered rather than shouted, but it was his face that arrested her. Sharp cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile, and eyes the pale blue of Arctic ice. He didn't turn when they entered. He just kept staring at the painting. "Miss Calloway has arrived, sir." Iris's voice carried the practiced neutrality of someone who'd learned not to show emotion around her employer. "Thank you, Iris. That will be all." Iris left without another word, and Rue found herself alone with the man who'd destroyed 6 people before her. "You're early." Dashiell still hadn't turned around. "Most people arrive exactly on time. They think it shows respect for my schedule, but early suggests either anxiety or strategy. Which is it, Miss Calloway?" "Respect. I live 3 hours away. I gave myself extra time in case of traffic or weather. Honest. Unexpected." He finally turned to face her, and the full force of his attention was like being pinned by a spotlight. "Tell me about your qualifications." "I have a degree in art history from Portland State. I worked for 3 years as an assistant curator at the Portland Art Museum before they downsized. I managed their Renaissance collection and helped coordinate 2 major exhibitions. I'm detail-oriented, discreet, and I understand the value of the work I'd be handling." "And your household management experience?" "Limited. I managed scheduling and logistics for the museum, which required coordinating contractors, security, and maintenance staff. But I've never run a private household." Most applicants would have lied, would have inflated their experience to seem more qualified. "Why are you telling me your weaknesses?" "Because you'll discover them anyway. I'd rather you hear them from me than figure them out and assume I was trying to deceive you." Something flickered in his eyes, there and gone so fast she might have imagined it. "What do you think of that painting?" He gestured to the shipwreck he'd been studying when she arrived. Rue stepped closer, examining the work. The painting showed a ship breaking apart in a storm, sailors clinging to debris, waves towering like mountains. The technique was masterful, the emotion devastating. "It's a Turner." "The Slave Ship," 1840. It's one of his most powerful pieces about the maritime slave trade. It's also one of the most controversial paintings of its era, because it forced people to confront an atrocity they'd rather ignore. Dashiell moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive. "What do you see when you look at it?" "I see people drowning while others watch. I see the moment when humanity fails itself. I see beauty and horror existing in the same space, which is maybe the most honest thing art can show us." He was quiet for a long moment. "And what would you do if I told you this painting was stolen?" The question was a trap, but Rue didn't know which answer would spring it. "I'd ask you to prove it. Then I'd ask myself why you'd tell me if it was true. And then I'd have to decide whether working here was worth compromising my ethics. Every painting in this collection has complete provenance. Every piece has a documented history. My father was many things, but he wasn't a thief. But people think he was. People think many things. Most of them are wrong. And the things they're right about?" Dashiell turned to face her fully, and she saw something dangerous in his expression. "Those are none of your concern. Your job, if I hire you, is to maintain this collection, to catalog it, preserve it, and ensure that it remains exactly as my father left it. Your job is also to manage the household staff, coordinate schedules, and maintain the property. Your job is not to judge me or my father or the choices we've made. Understood? Is it? Because the last 6 people who held this position all thought they understood, and they were all wrong. Then tell me what I'm really walking into. Tell me why 6 qualified people couldn't handle this job. Because I'm demanding, because I notice everything, because I expect perfection and have no patience for excuses. He stepped closer, invading her space deliberately. Because this house has rules, and those rules are not negotiable. Because I value privacy and loyalty above almost everything else. Because if you betray me, if you speak about what you see here, if you violate the trust this position requires, I will destroy you so thoroughly you'll wish you'd never heard my name. And, if I don't betray you, if I do my job perfectly and keep your secrets, then you'll be compensated well, treated fairly, and given more responsibility than you'd get anywhere else at your experience level. Rue met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated by the ice in his eyes or the threat in his voice. I need this job, Mr. Hargrove. I need it desperately. But I won't beg for it. And I won't pretend to be someone I'm not. I'm good at what I do. I'm loyal to people who earn my loyalty. I keep confidences, and I don't scare easily. If you hire me, I'll give you everything I have. But I won't let you bully me, and I won't accept being treated like I'm disposable. Everyone is disposable, Miss Calloway. Then you'll have no trouble replacing me when I quit. But until then, you'll treat me with respect, or you'll find yourself managing this house alone. The silence that followed was absolute. Dashiell stared at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve, his expression shifting between surprise and something that might have been approval. You're hired. The words were abrupt, almost angry. $95,000 a year, room and board included. You start tomorrow. Iris will show you to your quarters and explain the house rules. If you last 2 weeks, we'll discuss a contract. If you don't, you'll leave with 2 weeks severance and a non-disclosure agreement you'll sign before you go. Understood. One more thing. He pulled a document from his jacket pocket and handed it to her. Sign this before you unpack. It was a non-disclosure agreement. 10 pages of legal language that essentially said anything she saw, heard, or learned at Hargrove Manor was confidential in perpetuity. Violation would result in legal action and financial penalties that would bankrupt her for life. Rue read the entire document while Dashiell watched, his expression unreadable. This clause here. She pointed to a section near the end. It says, I can't discuss the artwork or its provenance with anyone outside the household. Does that include law enforcement? It includes everyone. Even if I discover something illegal? Do you expect to discover something illegal, Miss Calloway? I expect to do my job. But I won't sign something that makes me complicit in a crime. Dashiell's jaw tightened. The art in this house is legitimate, every piece. My father was many things, but he operated within the law. This clause protects my privacy, not criminal activity. Then you won't mind if I add a handwritten amendment stating that this agreement doesn't prevent me from cooperating with legitimate law enforcement investigations. For a moment, she thought he might rescind the job offer. His eyes went even colder, and his hands clenched at his sides. Then, slowly, he nodded. Add your amendment. Sign it. Bring it back to me tomorrow. He walked away, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor, leaving her alone in a gallery full of priceless art and questions she didn't yet know how to ask. Iris reappeared as if summoned by telepathy. If you'll follow me, Miss Calloway, I'll show you to your quarters. Rue's room was in the west wing, separated from Dashiell's private suite by the entire length of the manor. It was larger than her entire Portland apartment, with a 4-poster bed, a sitting area, a private bathroom with a clawfoot tub, and windows that looked out over the ocean. The room was beautiful, but like the rest of the house, it felt more like a stage set than a living space. This is lovely, thank you. Iris moved to the windows, adjusting curtains that didn't need adjusting. I should explain how things work here, Miss Calloway. The rules that Mr. Hargrove expects everyone to follow. Please. First, punctuality. Mr. Hargrove rises at 5:45 every morning. He expects coffee ready by 6, breakfast by 6:30. He's particular about his routine and doesn't tolerate disruption. Second, privacy. You don't enter his private suite for any reason. You don't go into his study unless invited. You don't ask personal questions. Third, the art. You'll be given access to the collection inventory and preservation logs. You'll perform weekly inspections and quarterly deep maintenance. Any concerns about a piece's condition are reported immediately. Fourth, Discretion. You don't discuss household matters with anyone outside this estate. You don't bring guests here. You don't post about your job on social media. 5th, loyalty. Iris turned from the window to face Rue directly. Mr. Hargrove has been betrayed by almost everyone he's ever trusted. If he senses disloyalty, even the possibility of it, you're done. And 6th? Rue asked, sensing there was more. 6th is the most important. Don't try to fix him. Don't try to understand him. Don't try to get close to him. The people who tried, the ones who thought they could be his friend or confidant or something more, they're the ones who got hurt the worst. What happened to them? Some quit. Some were fired. One had what I'd call a nervous breakdown. She lasted 7 weeks and left believing she was in love with him. He'd never so much as touched her hand, but she'd convinced herself that his coldness was just armor, that underneath he was desperate for connection. And he wasn't? Mr. Hargrove is exactly what he appears to be. A brilliant, damaged man who's chosen solitude over vulnerability. The kindest thing you can do for yourself is accept that and not try to change it. What if I'm not trying to change him? What if I just want to do my job? Iris smiled sadly. Then you'll be the first. And maybe, just maybe, you'll last longer than 2 weeks. After Iris left, Rue stood at her window, watching the ocean hurl itself against the rocks below. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of copper and blood, and somewhere in the manor, Dashiell Hargrove was doing whatever it was he did with his evenings. She thought about the way he'd looked at the shipwreck painting, the way his voice had changed when he defended his father, the way his hands had clenched when she demanded respect. Everyone said he was cold, untouchable, dangerous. But Rue had spent 3 years studying art, learning to see what was hidden beneath surfaces. And when she looked at Dashiell Hargrove, she didn't see ice. She saw someone who'd learned that caring led to pain, that trust led to betrayal, that the safest way to live was to need no one. She recognized it because she'd felt it herself after the Marshalls had taken her mother away, after her life had been turned upside down by circumstances beyond her control. The difference was that Rue had never had enough money or power to make her isolation comfortable. She'd never been able to build a fortress and call it home, but Dashiell Hargrove had, and now he was trapped inside it. The question was whether Rue was brave enough or foolish enough to walk into that trap with him. Tomorrow would provide some answers. Tomorrow she would begin the most dangerous job of her life. Tonight, she unpacked her meager belongings and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Rue's alarm went off at 5:15 a.m., dragging her from dreams of drowning in paintings. She dressed quickly in black slacks and a charcoal sweater, professional but not trying too hard, and made her way through the still dark manor to the kitchen. The kitchen was a chef's dream, all commercial-grade appliances and marble countertops. It was also spotlessly clean, as if no one had ever actually cooked there. Iris had left instructions on the counter. Mr. Hargrove's coffee preferences were detailed with scientific precision. Medium roast, specific brand, water temperature between 195 and 205 degrees, exactly 6 minutes of brewing time, served in a specific ceramic mug, no pressure. Rue followed the instructions exactly, her hands steady despite her nerves. At 5:58, she heard footsteps on the main staircase. Dashiell entered the kitchen at precisely 6 a.m., wearing running clothes and a sheen of sweat that suggested he'd already been exercising. His hair was damp, his breathing slightly elevated, and without the armor of his expensive suits, he looked younger, more human. "Good morning, Mr. Hargrove." He didn't respond, just moved to the coffee maker and took the mug she'd prepared. He sipped it, his expression unchanging, then nodded once. Acceptable. It was the closest thing to praise she was likely to get. He drank his coffee standing at the window, looking out at the ocean as dawn began to break. Rue started preparing breakfast, another detailed list of specifications. Egg white omelet, no cheese, vegetables steamed not sautéed, whole grain toast, dry. "How long have you been awake?" His question surprised her. "Since 5:15. "Why so early?" "Your duties don't officially start until 6. "I don't like being late." "Iris said you'd be punctual. She also said you amended the NDA." "I did. I hope that's acceptable. It's honest." "I told you, I value honesty." He turned from the window, studying her with those pale eyes. "Why do you need this job, Miss Calloway?" "Patricia Drummond at the employment office said you were desperate. I want to know why." It was a test. Rue could feel it, the weight of a question that demanded truth but could be used against her. "My mother is sick. Medical bills. I lost my job at the museum 3 months ago, and I've been burning through savings. I need the salary, and I need it soon." "What's wrong with your mother?" The question was casual, but it felt like stepping onto thin ice. "Multiple sclerosis, progressive. She needs medication that insurance doesn't fully cover." "And your father?" "Not in the picture. Never has been." Dashiell was quiet for a moment, something shifting in his expression. "Family can be complicated." "Yes, it can be." She plated his breakfast and set it on the table, then stepped back, unsure of the protocol. "You're not eating?" he asked. "I wasn't sure if I should." "Sit. I'm not going to conduct an interview over breakfast while you stand there watching me. It's not an interview. You already hired me. Consider it a probationary evaluation. Sit." Rue made herself a smaller version of his breakfast and sat across from him at the table. The silence stretched between them, not quite comfortable but not hostile either. "Tell me about the Portland Art Museum. Why did they let you go?" "Budget cuts. They eliminated 3 positions in my department. I was the most recent hire, so I was the first cut." "Did you enjoy the work?" "I loved it. Getting to spend every day with art that mattered, that had survived centuries, that connected us to people and times we'd never otherwise know. It felt like being a guardian of human creativity." "Why this particular art? Why Renaissance?" "Because it was a time when humanity was rediscovering itself. When science and art weren't separate, when people believed they could create beauty and meaning in a world that often seemed chaotic and cruel." "And do you believe that? That we can create beauty and meaning?" "I think we have to try. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this?" He studied her for a long moment. "You're an optimist. That's going to make working here difficult." "Why?" "Because this house doesn't reward optimism. It punishes it. Maybe I'll surprise you. Maybe you will. But I doubt it." They finished breakfast in silence, and then Dashiell stood, checking his watch. "I have calls at 7. Iris will go over the collection inventory with you. You'll start cataloging condition reports today. I want a full assessment of every piece by the end of the week. That's 68 paintings, 22 sculptures, and countless smaller works. That's not realistic in 5 days. Then work faster. The first rule of this house, Miss Calloway, is that my expectations are always met, regardless of whether they're realistic. And if I can't meet them, then you'll join the list of people who thought they could handle this job and learned otherwise." He left her sitting at the table, his footsteps echoing through the manor, and Rue allowed herself a moment of pure panic. What had she gotten herself into? The rest of the morning was spent with Iris, going through the collection inventory. Each piece had a file, complete with provenance documentation, purchase records, and previous condition reports. The organization was impeccable, but the sheer volume was overwhelming. "This one." Rue pointed to a file for a Vermeer. "The provenance has a gap. 1942 to 1953. No documentation about where it was or who owned it." Iris's expression didn't change. "That gap coincides with World War II. Many works were displaced during that time. Mr. Hargrove's father acquired it legally in '53 from a Belgian collector. But the Belgian collector's ownership isn't documented either. Nevertheless, it was a legal purchase. The painting has been authenticated multiple times. There's no question of its legitimacy." Rue made a note in her tablet. "I'll need to research this more thoroughly." Iris's voice took on a warning tone. "Miss Calloway, I'd advise against pursuing questions about provenance gaps. Mr. Hargrove is sensitive about implications that his father's collection might be compromised. I'm not implying anything. I'm doing my job. If I'm going to be responsible for this collection, I need to understand every piece completely. Just be careful how you present your findings." That afternoon, Rue began her condition assessments. She worked methodically, examining each painting under different lights, checking for any signs of deterioration, documenting everything. She was studying a Caravaggio when she felt someone watching her. She turned to find Dashiell standing in the doorway, still in his business clothes from his morning calls. "How's the assessment going?" Slowly. "Most pieces are in excellent condition, but there are a few concerns. Such as, the Caravaggio has some crack allure in the upper right quadrant. Nothing critical yet, but it should be monitored. The Turner we discussed this morning has some fading in the pigments, probably from light exposure over time. And the Vermeer? Beautiful, perfectly preserved, but the provenance documentation has significant gaps." His expression hardened. "I thought we discussed this." "We didn't discuss it. Iris warned me not to ask about it. But I'm asking anyway because it's my job. Your job is to maintain the collection, not question its legitimacy." "I'm not questioning legitimacy. I'm noting incomplete documentation. There's a difference. To you, perhaps. To others, questions about provenance suggest stolen work, looted art, illegal acquisition. Those questions can destroy reputations and devalue collections. Then the answers should be clear enough to eliminate the questions." He moved closer, and she could feel the temperature in the room drop. "You've been here one day, Miss Calloway. One day. And you're already pushing boundaries you were told not to push. You told me you value honesty. You told me you want someone who won't lie to you. If I find gaps in documentation and don't report them, I'm lying by omission. Or you're being diplomatic. I don't know how to be diplomatic about facts." They stood facing each other, the tension crackling between them like electricity before a storm. "My father," Dashiell said slowly, his voice controlled but strained, "spent 40 years building this collection. He was meticulous about documentation, about provenance, about ensuring that every piece was acquired legally and ethically. The gaps you're seeing aren't evidence of wrongdoing. They're evidence of a world that was in chaos, where record-keeping wasn't always possible. I understand that. But understanding doesn't change the fact that questions exist. And those questions serve what purpose? Making you feel morally superior? Giving you ammunition to use against me later?" The accusation stung because it was so fundamentally wrong. "No. Those questions serve the purpose of protecting you. If someone ever challenges the legitimacy of this collection, complete documentation is your best defense. I'm trying to help you. I didn't ask for your help. You hired me to manage this collection. Managing means ensuring its integrity in every way possible." He stared at her, and she saw something shift in his expression. The anger was still there, but it was mixed with something else now. Confusion, perhaps, or reluctant respect. "Fine. Research your gaps, document your concerns, present your findings in a report by Friday. But know this. If you find something that compromises my father's reputation or this collection's value, I won't thank you for it. I'm not looking for thanks. I'm looking to do my job correctly." He left without another word, and Rue found herself shaking slightly, adrenaline flooding her system. She'd just survived her first real confrontation with Dashiell Hargrove. She'd stood her ground, refused to back down, and somehow still had her job. Whether that made her brave or foolish remained to be seen. That evening, exhausted from a day of intense work and emotional confrontation, Rue returned to her room to find a note slipped under her door. The handwriting was precise, almost architectural. "Miss Calloway, you were correct to note the provenance gaps. Thoroughness is essential in collection management. Continue your research. DH." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even close to warm. But it was an acknowledgement, a small crack in the ice. Rue held the note and allowed herself a small smile. Maybe, just maybe, she could survive this after all. The rest of Rue's first week passed in a blur of cataloging, documentation, and careful navigation of Dashiell Hargrove's unpredictable moods. Some mornings he was almost civil, asking about her progress, occasionally offering insights about particular pieces in the collection. Other mornings he was silent as stone, drinking his coffee and disappearing into his study without a word. She learned his patterns, the way he drummed his fingers on his desk when he was thinking, the slight tightening of his jaw when something displeased him, the way he stood at the gallery windows during rainstorms, staring at the ocean like he was searching for answers in the waves. She also learned the house's patterns, the way certain floorboards creaked in the West Wing, the sound the heating system made when it cycled on at 4 a.m., The way light moved through the gallery at different times of day, illuminating paintings in ways that revealed details invisible at other hours. On Thursday afternoon, as Rue was examining a small Rembrandt sketch, Magnus Thorpe appeared in the gallery doorway. Magnus was the estate manager. A man in his 50s with weathered hands and eyes that missed nothing. He handled the grounds, the maintenance, and according to Iris, had worked for the Hargrove family since Dashiell's father was alive. Miss Calloway. Magnus's voice was rough from years of outdoor work. Got a minute? Of course. What can I help you with? It's what I can help you with, actually. He moved into the gallery, glancing around as if checking for eavesdroppers. I heard you asking Iris about the house history. Thought you might want to know some things she won't tell you. Rue set down her tablet, curiosity piqued. I'm listening. This house has been in the Hargrove family for 3 generations. Dashiell's grandfather built it in 1928, made his fortune in timber and shipping. Dashiell's father, Cornelius, expanded the business and started the art collection. He was obsessed with it, spent more time in the gallery than he did with his family. I've heard Cornelius died in a boating accident. Magnus's expression darkened. That's the official story. The truth is more complicated. What do you mean? Cornelius went out on his yacht one evening 15 years ago. Storm rolled in. Worse than anyone expected. Coast Guard found the yacht capsized the next morning, found Cornelius's body 3 days later washed up on the rocks below the estate. That sounds like an accident. It does, doesn't it? Except Cornelius was an experienced sailor. He'd navigated worse storms. And he went out that night right after a screaming match with Dashiell. Half the house heard it. What were they fighting about? Magnus hesitated, then said quietly, the collection. Dashiell had discovered something, some irregularity in the provenance of several pieces. He confronted his father, demanded answers. Cornelius told him to mind his own business, that the collection was above reproach. They fought, Cornelius stormed out, and he never came back. Rue felt her stomach tighten. You're saying Dashiell thinks his father's death was his fault. I'm saying Dashiell knows his father chose a storm over facing questions about his integrity. I'm saying guilt has been eating him alive for 15 years. I'm saying that's why he's so protective of the collection, why he can't tolerate questions about provenance, why he pushes away anyone who gets close. And why are you telling me this? Because you're different from the others. Magnus studied her carefully. The others came here seeing dollar signs or adventure or a story they could tell later. You came here desperate and stayed honest. You stood up to him when he tried to intimidate you. You're doing the work he needs done, the work of actually understanding this collection instead of just maintaining it. I appreciate that, but I'm not sure what you expect me to do with this information. I expect you to be careful. Dashiell isn't cruel for the sake of cruelty. He's protecting himself from pain he's already carrying. If you push too hard on the wrong issues, you'll trigger defenses that will destroy you both. Before Rue could respond, a voice cut through the gallery like a blade. Am I interrupting something? Dashiell stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable but his posture radiating controlled anger. Magnus straightened, his face carefully neutral. Just discussing the grounds maintenance schedule with Miss Calloway, sir. Making sure her research won't be disturbed by the landscaping crew next week. How considerate. Dashiell's tone suggested he didn't believe a word. Magnus, I need you to check the generator in the east wing. It's been making unusual sounds. Right away, sir. Magnus left, but not before throwing Rue a look that said, be careful. Alone with Dashiell, the gallery suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in. Was there something you needed, Mr. Hargrove? I need to know what Magnus was really telling you. And don't insult my intelligence by repeating his lie about landscaping schedules. Rue considered her options. She could lie, maintain Magnus's cover story, avoid confrontation, or she could do what she'd been doing since she arrived. Tell the truth and deal with the consequences. He was telling me about your father, about the night he died. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Dashiell's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his jaw tight enough to crack teeth. He had no right. Maybe not. But he cares about you. And he's worried. Worried about what exactly? About what will happen when I finish my provenance research and find whatever it was your father was hiding. The silence that followed was absolute. Dashiell stared at her with eyes that looked like they could cut glass, and Rue braced herself for the explosion. Instead, his voice, when it came, was quiet, almost conversational. You think you're very clever, don't you? Coming in here, playing the honest truth-teller, making everyone think you're different from the others. But you're not different. You're just better at manipulation. That's not fair. Fair? He laughed, a sound devoid of humor. You want to talk about fair? My father built something extraordinary. He dedicated his life to preserving beauty and history. And when he died, do you know what people said? They said he was a thief, a looter, a criminal who'd hidden stolen art behind legitimate purchases. They said it with no evidence, no proof, just whispers and suspicions and the kind of casual cruelty that destroys reputations. If the collection is legitimate, then my research will prove that. It will silence the whispers, or it will confirm them. And then what? Then my father's legacy is destroyed, and the work he spent 40 years building is revealed as a lie. Is that what you're afraid of? That I'll find proof he was a criminal? I'm afraid, Dashiell said slowly, his voice shaking slightly, that you'll find proof he was human, that he made mistakes, that he cut corners or looked the other way, or convinced himself that the ends justified the means. I'm afraid you'll find the truth, and the truth will take away the only good thing I have left of him. The raw pain in his voice struck Rue like a physical blow. This wasn't the Ice King. This was a son who'd lost his father under terrible circumstances and spent 15 years trying to protect a memory. Mr. Hargrove, don't. He held up a hand, his control reasserting itself. Don't try to comfort me. Don't try to understand me. Just do your job, write your report, and let me deal with the consequences. And if the consequences are that the collection is compromised, then I'll handle it. But I'll handle it alone. That's what I do, Miss Calloway. I handle things alone because that's the only way to ensure they're handled correctly. He walked away, his footsteps echoing through the manor, leaving Rue alone with a gallery full of priceless art and a heart full of questions she didn't know how to answer. That night, unable to sleep, Rue found herself in the manor's library. It was a 2-story room lined with books, comfortable chairs positioned near a fireplace that hadn't been lit in years. She was searching for references on wartime art acquisition when she heard piano music drifting through the house. The sound was haunting, a melody so sad it seemed to carry the weight of all the world's grief. It was coming from somewhere on the first floor, pulling her like a siren song. She followed the music to a room she hadn't explored yet, a conservatory attached to the main house through a glass corridor. Inside, surrounded by plants that had been allowed to grow wild, sat a grand piano. And at the piano sat Dashiell. He played with his eyes closed, his fingers moving across the keys with the kind of fluency that spoke of years of training. The music poured from him like it was the only language he really spoke, the only way he knew how to express what words couldn't touch. Rue stood in the doorway, not wanting to interrupt but unable to walk away. The music was too raw, too honest, too much of a glimpse into the soul of a man who'd spent 15 years hiding from the world. When the piece finally ended, Dashiell's hands rested on the keys, but he didn't open his eyes. How long have you been standing there? His voice was quiet, drained of its usual edge. Long enough. You should go back to your room. I should. But I'm not going to. Not until you tell me what that piece was. Chopin, Nocturne, in C-sharp minor. Posthumous. It's a piece about loss, about longing for something you can never have again. It's beautiful. It's sad. He finally opened his eyes, but he didn't turn to look at her. I used to play for my mother. She died when I was 14. Cancer. She made me promise I'd keep playing, that I wouldn't let grief silence the music. I kept that promise for years. Then my father died, and I couldn't anymore. The music reminded me of everything I'd lost. What changed? Why are you playing now? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, You did. Me? What did I do? You asked questions. You pushed boundaries. You refused to accept the version of reality I'd constructed. You made me remember that avoiding pain doesn't make it go away. It just turns it into something that consumes you from the inside. Rue moved into the conservatory, stepping carefully around overgrown ferns and untended orchids. She sat on a bench near the piano, close enough to see his face but far enough to give him space. Magnus told me you blame yourself for your father's death. Magnus talks too much. Do you blame yourself? Dashiell's hands moved over the keys, not playing but touching. As if the piano could provide comfort, words couldn't. I pushed him. I demanded answers about the collection's provenance when I knew he was sensitive about it. I accused him of cutting corners, of being less than perfectly ethical, and he left the house in a rage and never came back. So yes, I blame myself. You were asking legitimate questions. I was punishing him for not being perfect, for being human, for making choices that complicated my nice, clean understanding of right and wrong. And what would you do differently now? I'd realize that people are complicated, that good people sometimes make questionable choices, that loving someone means accepting their imperfections instead of demanding they live up to impossible standards. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning that extended beyond his relationship with his father. Rue took a breath, choosing her words carefully. I've spent this week researching the collection's provenance. I've found gaps, yes. Some pieces have incomplete documentation from the war years, but I haven't found evidence of theft or looting. What I've found is a man who was passionate about preserving art, who sometimes acquired pieces in ways that were legally gray but not criminal, who bent rules but didn't break laws. How can you be sure? Because I've cross-referenced every piece with databases of stolen art, with lists of works looted by the Nazis, with international registries. Your father's collection is clean, Mr. Hargrove. It's not perfect, but it's clean. She saw his shoulders relax slightly, saw something that might have been relief flicker across his face. You're certain? As certain as I can be with the evidence available. I'll document everything in my report. But the conclusion is that your father built a legitimate collection. Complicated, yes. Ethically ambiguous in a few cases, perhaps. But legitimate. Why are you telling me this now? Why not wait for the formal report? Because you needed to hear it. Because you've been carrying guilt for 15 years based on suspicions that don't hold up under scrutiny. Because, she hesitated, then continued, because I understand what it's like to lose a parent and spend the rest of your life wondering if you could have saved them. Dashiell turned to look at her fully for the first time. Your mother. The MS. You think you should have caught it sooner, gotten her treatment sooner. I know, intellectually, that's not how it works. That MS is progressive and unpredictable, that earlier diagnosis wouldn't have changed the outcome. But intellectually knowing and emotionally accepting are different things. Yes, they are. He stood from the piano, moving to the conservatory windows where rain had started to fall. I've spent 15 years building walls, Miss Calloway. Walls to keep people out, to keep pain out, to keep the world from seeing how broken I am. And you've been here 1 week and you're already dismantling them. Is that a problem? It's terrifying. He turned to face her, and for the first time, she saw him without any armor at all. Just a man who'd been lonely for so long he'd forgotten what connection felt like. I don't know how to let people close. I don't know how to trust that they won't hurt me or leave me or use what they know against me. Then maybe it's time to learn. And if I can't, if I hurt you in the process of trying, then I'll survive it. I'm stronger than I look. I'm beginning to realize that. They stood in the conservatory, rain hammering against the glass, surrounded by wild plants and unspoken possibilities, and something shifted between them, something that felt like the beginning of understanding, or maybe the end of isolation. I should let you get back to sleep. Dashiell's voice was softer now, almost gentle. Thank you for the information about the collection. It means more than you know. You're welcome. Rue stood to leave, then paused. Mr. Hargrove, will you play something else? Something hopeful? He returned to the piano, his fingers finding a new melody. This time the music was lighter, touched with something that might have been hope or might have been the memory of it. Rue listened until the piece ended, then made her way back through the dark manor to her room, carrying with her the sound of music and the image of a man learning to feel again. She didn't know what was growing between them. She couldn't name it yet, couldn't define its boundaries or predict its future. But she knew it was real, and she knew it was changing both of them in ways neither could control. The question was whether that change would heal them or destroy them. Friday morning arrived with brilliant sunshine, a rarity on the Oregon coast. Rue woke early, as had become her habit, and made her way to the kitchen to prepare Dashiell's coffee. She was surprised to find him already there, standing at the counter in jeans and a sweater instead of his usual business attire. "You're up early." She tried to keep her voice casual, professional, but something had shifted after their late-night conversation in the conservatory. "I thought we could do something different today." "Different how?" "The collection assessment is essentially complete. Your report isn't due until this afternoon. I thought I'd show you something most people don't get to see." Rue felt her curiosity spark. "What kind of something?" "The private vault, where my father kept his most valuable acquisitions, the pieces he never displayed publicly." "Why would you show me that?" "Because—" Dashiell poured himself coffee, his movements careful and deliberate. "You've earned my trust, and because some of those pieces need professional assessment. They haven't been properly examined in 15 years. I'd be honored." They drove in Dashiell's Range Rover to a location about 2 miles from the main estate, following a coastal road that hugged the cliffs. The building they arrived at looked like a bunker, concrete and steel set into the hillside, with security that would make a bank jealous. Dashiell navigated multiple locks, keypads, and biometric scanners before a heavy door swung open, revealing a climate-controlled space about the size of a small house. Inside were paintings, sculptures, and artifacts that took Rue's breath away. "This is incredible." She moved through the space, recognizing works she'd only seen in textbooks. "Is that a Da Vinci sketch?" "Study for the Adoration of the Magi. My father acquired it from a private collector in Florence in 1978. "And that sculpture?" "Roman, 2nd century, recovered from a villa excavation near Pompeii." "Legally?" Dashiell smiled slightly. "Yes, Miss Calloway. Legally. My father had many faults, but he drew the line at looting archaeological sites." They spent the next 2 hours examining pieces, Rue making notes, while Dashiell shared stories about acquisitions. His voice changed when he talked about the art, losing its hard edge, becoming almost warm with enthusiasm and knowledge. "Your father taught you well. He taught me that art is humanity's way of defying death. That creating beauty is an act of rebellion against a world that tends toward chaos and destruction." "Do you believe that?" "I used to." Dashiell stood before a painting of a mother and child, something Renaissance and achingly tender. "Then he died, and I started thinking that maybe beauty doesn't matter. That in the end, everything we create and preserve still disappears. We still die. The people we love still leave. Nothing is permanent, but that's exactly why it matters." Rue moved to stand beside him. "Because nothing is permanent, because we all die. Creating and preserving beauty is how we say that our brief time here meant something. It's how we connect across centuries and continents. It's how we tell each other that we were here, that we felt and thought and tried to make something that mattered." He looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "You sound like my mother. She used to say almost the same thing. Tell me about her." Dashiell moved to a bench in the center of the vault, sitting down slowly as if the weight of memory was physical. "Her name was Catherine. She was a painter herself, not famous but talented. She saw beauty everywhere, in everything. She could find something worth preserving in the most ordinary moments." "How did she and your father meet?" "At an art auction in New York. She was there selling some of her own work. He was there acquiring a Monet. He said later that he bought the painting but fell in love with the woman bidding against him." "That's romantic." "It was also complicated. My father was intense, controlling, obsessed with his collection. My mother was free-spirited, spontaneous, always wanting to create new things instead of preserving old ones. They fought constantly about his priorities, about how much time he spent with art instead of family. But they loved each other desperately. Even when they were fighting, you could see it. The way they looked at each other, the way they'd reconcile over shared appreciation of a beautiful painting or a perfectly composed photograph. Love didn't fix their problems. but it made them worth fighting through. Until she died. Until she died. Dashiell's voice went quiet. And then my father threw himself even deeper into the collection. It was like he was trying to fill the void she left with beauty she would have appreciated. Like he thought if he could just acquire enough art, preserve enough history, he could somehow bring her back. Grief makes us do strange things. It makes us do desperate things. After she died, I understood my father better. I understood why he needed the collection, why it consumed him. It wasn't about money or status. It was about creating something that wouldn't leave him, something that couldn't die. Is that why you've kept it? Even though it costs you so much emotionally, I've kept it because it's the last connection I have to both of them. Every piece my father acquired, every decision about placement and preservation, those were conversations he would have had with my mother if she'd lived. Maintaining the collection is like keeping them both alive. Rue felt tears prick her eyes. She understood loss, understood the desperate need to hold on to anything that connected you to people who'd gone. But she also understood that holding on too tightly could crush the very thing you were trying to preserve. Can I tell you something? She sat beside him on the bench. Something I learned when my mother got sick? Please. I learned that the best way to honor someone isn't to freeze them in time. It's to let them change you, to carry forward the things they taught you, to live in a way that reflects their values instead of just preserving their possessions. Dashiell was quiet, absorbing her words. My mother taught me to see beauty in ordinary things. So now, even on the worst days, I try to find something worth appreciating. A sunset, a well-made cup of coffee, the sound of rain. I don't do it perfectly, but I try. And when I do, I feel close to her in a way that looking at photographs never achieves. What did your father teach you? That excellence matters. That details matter. That if you're going to do something, do it correctly or don't do it at all. He was rigid about it, sometimes cruel in his standards, but underneath that rigidity was a belief that human beings are capable of extraordinary things if we refuse to settle for mediocrity. And are you honoring that by hiding yourself away, by pushing people out, by maintaining impossible standards that prevent you from connecting with anyone? The question was bold, dangerous. Rue held her breath, waiting for him to shut down, to retreat behind his walls. Instead, he laughed. A real laugh, surprised and genuine and completely unexpected. You don't pull punches, do you, Miss Calloway? I thought we established that I'm honest to a fault. You did. And I'm beginning to appreciate it, even when it's uncomfortable. He turned to face her more fully. You're right. I'm not honoring my father by living in isolation. I'm hiding, using his death and the collection as an excuse to avoid the risk of caring about anyone. Why? Because everyone I've ever cared about has either died or left. My mother, my father, even Victoria, the woman I almost married. She stayed until my father died and the inheritance was uncertain, then disappeared. Why would I risk that pain again? Because the alternative is this. Rue gestured around the vault. Beautiful artifacts in a climate-controlled tomb. Perfectly preserved and completely lifeless. Is that really what you want? To be like these paintings? Admired from a distance but never touched, never truly connected to the living world. No. The word was quiet but certain. No, I don't want that. Then what do you want? He looked at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her feel like she was standing at the edge of a cliff. I want to stop being afraid. I want to let someone close without waiting for the moment they'll leave. I want to feel something besides emptiness and obligation. What's stopping you? Fear, habit, the certainty that I'll fail at it, that I'll hurt whoever is brave enough or foolish enough to try. What if they're willing to risk it anyway? The air between them crackled with unspoken possibility. They were sitting close enough that Rue could see flecks of darker blue in his pale eyes, could smell his cologne mixed with something uniquely him. Miss Calloway. Rue. My name is Rue. Rue. He said it like he was tasting the word, testing its weight. I need to tell you something. All right. I've never, in 15 years of employing household staff, brought anyone to this vault. I've never shared stories about my parents with an employee. I've never sat in a climate-controlled room talking about fear and connection when I should be maintaining professional boundaries. Why are you doing it now? Because you're not just an employee. You stopped being just an employee the moment you demanded I treat you with respect, the moment you stood up to me instead of cowering, the moment you looked at my father's collection and saw not just art but the story of a complicated man trying to create meaning. What am I then, if I'm not just an employee? He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her face with fingers that trembled slightly. You're the first person in 15 years who's made me want to try, who's made me think that maybe isolation isn't safety, maybe it's just another form of dying. Rue's heart hammered against her ribs. Every rational thought screamed that this was dangerous, that she was violating every professional boundary, that caring for Dashiell Hargrove would end in heartbreak. But her heart had never been particularly rational. I'm scared too. Her voice was barely a whisper. I came here desperate, willing to do anything to survive. And somewhere in the past week, survival stopped being enough. You stopped being just my employer. And I don't know what to do with that. What do you want to do with it? I want to be honest. I want to see where this goes. I want to risk getting hurt if it means feeling alive instead of just existing, even knowing that I'm damaged, that I'll probably fail at this more often than I succeed. Everyone is damaged. Everyone fails. The question is whether we're brave enough to try anyway. He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching hers, his breath warm against her skin. I haven't been brave in a very long time. Then maybe it's time to start. He kissed her then, soft and tentative and absolutely terrifying in its tenderness. It wasn't the kiss of a billionaire taking what he wanted. It was the kiss of a man who'd forgotten how to reach for anything and was learning again, carefully, hopefully, with someone who made it feel safe to try. When they finally pulled apart, Dashiell rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, his breathing uneven. This changes everything. I know. I don't know how to do this. How to be with someone. How to let someone matter. Neither do I. We'll figure it out together. And when I mess it up, when I retreat or push you away or fall back into old patterns, then I'll call you on it, just like I've been doing, and you'll try again. That's how people learn, Dashiell, through failure and forgiveness and the willingness to keep showing up. He opened his eyes, and she saw vulnerability there that made her chest ache. I don't deserve you. You don't get to decide that. I do. And I say you're worth the risk. They sat in the vault, surrounded by priceless art, holding on to each other like they'd found something more valuable than any painting. Two damaged people choosing courage over fear, connection over safety, the possibility of love over the certainty of loneliness. Outside, the sun continued to shine, a rare, perfect day on the Oregon coast. Inside, something even rarer was beginning, something that might break them both or might save them. Only time would tell which. The weekend passed in a blur of careful exploration. Dashiell showed Rue parts of the estate she hadn't seen, private gardens where his mother had painted, the beach below the cliffs where he'd spent hours as a child searching for sea glass. They talked for hours, sharing histories and fears and dreams they'd both thought were dead, but they also maintained careful boundaries. Rue still slept in her room in the West Wing. Dashiell still called her Miss Calloway in front of Iris and Magnus. They were navigating something new and fragile, and both understood that rushing would shatter it. Monday morning arrived with fog so thick it turned the world gray and formless. Rue was in the gallery doing her weekly inspection when Iris appeared, her expression troubled. Miss Calloway, you have a visitor. I do? I'm not expecting anyone. She says she's from the Portland Art Museum. Says she needs to speak with you about a previous investigation. Rue's stomach dropped. The museum. The only reason they'd contact her was if something had gone wrong, if some piece she'd worked with had been challenged or questioned. Where is she? The formal sitting room. Mr. Hargrove is with her. That wasn't good. Rue hurried through the manor, her mind racing through possibilities, trying to remember if she'd made any mistakes in her years at the museum, any authentication she'd gotten wrong. The woman waiting in the sitting room was in her 40s, professionally dressed, with sharp eyes that assessed everything. Beside her sat Dashiell, his expression carefully neutral but his posture tense. Miss Calloway. The woman stood, extending her hand. I'm Lauren Hartwell, senior investigator with the Art Loss Register. I apologize for the unexpected visit, but I have some questions about your time at the Portland Art Museum. Of course. How can I help? You worked with the museum's Renaissance collection from 2017 to 2020. Is that correct? Yes. During that time, did you have access to provenance documentation for all pieces in the collection? Yes. It was part of my job to verify and maintain those records. Were you ever asked to authenticate pieces with incomplete provenance? Occasionally. When a piece was donated or acquired, part of my job was to research its history and document what could be verified. Lauren pulled a folder from her briefcase. I'm specifically interested in a painting the museum acquired in 2018. A small Renaissance piece attributed to Filippo Lippi. Do you remember it? Rue searched her memory. Yes. It was donated by a private collector. The provenance was mostly complete, but there was a gap from 1940 to 1955. And did you approve its acceptance into the collection? I recommended accepting it with the notation that the provenance gap should continue to be researched. The piece itself was authentic. I verified that through multiple methods. The gap didn't suggest theft, just incomplete record-keeping during and after World War II. Lauren nodded, making notes. And did you receive any pressure from museum administration to overlook provenance gaps? To authenticate pieces that might have questionable histories? No, never. The museum was scrupulous about documentation. Even when donors were pressuring for quick acceptance, even when pieces came with significant financial contributions, Rue felt ice forming in her stomach. What is this about, Miss Hartwell? Lauren looked at Dashiell, then back to Rue. The painting you authenticated has been challenged. A family in Austria claims it was looted from their home during World War II. They're demanding its return, and they're suggesting that the museum knowingly accepted stolen property. That's ridiculous. I researched that piece extensively. There was no indication it was looted, and yet it appears on a recently discovered list of artworks taken from Viennese homes in 1942. Then the list is wrong, or it's a different painting, or you missed something. Lauren's voice wasn't accusatory, just stating fact, either through incompetence or pressure or deliberate oversight. I would never deliberately authenticate stolen art. Nevertheless, the museum is facing a lawsuit. And as the curator who approved the acquisition, your professional reputation is being questioned. Rue felt the room tilt slightly. Everything she'd worked for, her credibility, her career, her integrity, was being challenged. And the worst part was knowing that even a false accusation could destroy her. Dashiell spoke for the first time, his voice cold and controlled. What exactly do you need from Miss Calloway? We need her to review the authentication documents she prepared. We need her to provide testimony about the research process. And we need to understand if there was any external pressure that might have influenced her recommendations. External pressure from whom? From anyone with an interest in the piece being accepted. Lauren's gaze was steady. Donors, administrators, or other parties with potential financial interests. I see. Dashiell stood, his posture radiating authority. Miss Hartwell, I appreciate you coming here personally rather than simply subpoenaing Miss Calloway. However, before she provides any additional information, she'll need to consult with legal counsel. I'll ensure she has access to the best art law attorneys in the country. That's very generous, Mr. Hargrove. But I should inform you that our investigation may expand to include other institutions and private collections. Any patterns of questionable authentication could have broader implications. The threat was clear. This wasn't just about one painting at the Portland Art Museum. This was about Rue's entire body of work, including everything she'd authenticated since arriving at Hargrove Manor. I understand. Dashiell's voice was ice. I'm confident that Miss Calloway's work will withstand any scrutiny. Her research has been impeccable, her methodology beyond reproach. If there's an error in the Lippi attribution, it's the result of incomplete historical records, not professional misconduct. I hope you're right. Lauren gathered her materials. Miss Calloway, you'll be hearing from my office within the week. Please don't leave the state without notifying us. After she left, Rue sank into a chair, her hands shaking. This can't be happening. I was so careful with that piece. I documented everything, cross-referenced multiple databases, consulted with other experts. Dashiell knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. I know you were. This isn't about your competence. This is about someone looking for a scapegoat. But what if I did miss something? What if in trying to move quickly, in trying to prove myself at the museum, I overlooked evidence that the painting was stolen? Then we'll deal with it. We'll hire the best lawyers, provide evidence of your thorough research process, demonstrate that any error was honest mistake, not deliberate malfeasance. My career is over. Even if I'm cleared, the accusation alone will destroy my credibility. No one will ever trust my authentication again. I trust your authentication. Every assessment you've done of my collection has been thorough, insightful, and professionally impeccable. You have to say that. I'm what? He asked gently. You're involved with me. Your judgment isn't objective anymore. Neither is yours about yourself. Dashiell pulled her to her feet, holding her steady when she felt like she might shatter. You're catastrophizing. You're assuming the worst outcome without letting the facts emerge. Right now, all we know is that a painting is being challenged. That happens. It doesn't automatically mean you did anything wrong. But what if I did? What if my work here is compromised too? What if I've been making the same mistakes with your collection? Then we'll address them. Together. But Rue, listen to me. I've spent the past week reviewing every assessment you've prepared. Your work is exceptional. You catch details other curators miss. You question assumptions and research thoroughly. Whatever happened with that lippy painting, it isn't the result of sloppy methodology. The fear in Rue's chest loosened slightly. You really believe that? I really do. And we're going to prove it. The next 3 days were a nightmare of legal consultations, document reviews, and mounting anxiety. Dashiell hired a team of attorneys specializing in art law, and they descended on Hargrove Manor like a well-dressed army. Rue spent hours reconstructing her authentication process for the lippy painting, providing every scrap of documentation, every research note, every consultation with other experts. The attorneys were thorough, professional, and reassuring in their assessment that she'd done everything correctly. But reassurance couldn't eliminate the knot of fear that had taken up residence in her chest. On Thursday evening, exhausted from another day of depositions and document review, Rue found Dashiell in the conservatory. He was at the piano but not playing, just sitting with his hands resting on the keys. You don't have to stay, you know. She said it quietly, giving him an out. If this investigation expands to your collection, if my presence here becomes a liability, I'll understand. He turned to look at her, his expression fierce. You think I'd abandon you because things got difficult? You think I'm that much of a coward? I think you're protecting something precious. This collection, your father's legacy. If I'm the threat to that, you're not a threat. You're the best thing that's happened to this house in 15 years. You brought life back to these rooms. You made me remember what it feels like to care about something besides preservation and obligation. I'm not losing that because of a questionable lawsuit. But your reputation, my reputation has survived worse than being associated with a talented curator facing a professional challenge. He stood, moving to where she stood in the doorway. I told you I don't know how to do this, how to be with someone. But I know I don't walk away when things get hard. I've done enough running in my life. I don't want to be another burden you're carrying. You're not a burden. You're a choice. The first real choice I've made in years that wasn't about duty or obligation or protecting myself. I'm choosing you, Rue, even when it's scary, even when it's complicated, especially then. She fell into his arms, allowing herself to be held, to be comforted by someone who was as terrified as she was, but brave enough to stay anyway. Thank you. The words were muffled against his chest. Thank you for what? For seeing me, for believing in me, for not assuming the worst. I see you. He tilted her face up, his eyes intense. I see someone brilliant and thorough and honest to a fault. I see someone who took a job nobody wanted and exceeded every expectation. I see someone who's scared but facing her fear instead of running from it. And I see someone I'm falling in love with, even though that terrifies me more than any lawsuit ever could. The words hung between them, too big to take back, too true to deny. You're falling in love with me? I am. God help us both. I am. Rue kissed him then, pouring everything she couldn't say into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, she whispered, "I'm falling too. I tried not to. I tried to keep things professional, to maintain boundaries, but you made that impossible." "How?" "By being real. By letting me see the person underneath all that ice. By trusting me with your vulnerabilities instead of just showing me your strengths." They stood in the conservatory, holding each other while the world tried to tear them apart, and chose to hold on tighter instead of letting go. Whatever was coming, they'd face it together. At least, that's what they believed. They didn't know that the worst was still ahead. They didn't know that sometimes love wasn't enough to survive the storm. They were about to find out. Friday morning dawned gray and threatening, matching Rue's mood perfectly. She'd barely slept, her mind running through endless scenarios, each worse than the last. The legal team had been confident, but confidence didn't change facts. If the Lippy painting was stolen, if she'd missed evidence that would have revealed it, her career was over. She was preparing Dashiell's coffee when her phone rang. Unknown number. "Miss Calloway?" "This is Detective Sarah Brennan with the Portland Police Department Art Theft Division. I need you to come to Portland for questioning regarding the Lippy investigation." "Questioning? I've already provided everything to the attorneys. This is a separate matter. We've received information suggesting the authentication irregularities extend beyond a single painting. We need to discuss your time at the museum and your current work at Hargrove Manor." Rue's blood ran cold. "My current work? We have reason to believe that some pieces in the Hargrove collection may have questionable provenance. Pieces you've been responsible for authenticating and maintaining. That's absurd. Every piece has been thoroughly researched. Then you won't mind answering questions under oath." Detective Brennan's voice was professionally neutral. "We can do this the easy way, with you voluntarily coming to Portland, or the difficult way, with a subpoena and potential obstruction charges. Your choice." "I'll come." "When?" "Today, 2 p.m. Portland Police Central Precinct." The call ended, leaving Rue staring at her phone in shock. Dashiell entered the kitchen, took one look at her face, and stopped. "What happened?" "Portland Police. They want to question me about your collection. They're suggesting some pieces might be stolen." "Based on what evidence?" "I don't know. They wouldn't say." Dashiell's expression hardened. "I'm calling the attorneys." "You're not going anywhere without legal representation." The next hours passed in a blur of frantic phone calls and hurried preparations. The legal team agreed to meet Rue in Portland, but they were clear about the seriousness of the situation. If the police had opened an investigation, if they were looking at the Hargrove collection, the implications went far beyond Rue's career. This could destroy everything. Dashiell stood at the gallery windows, staring at his father's collection with an expression that broke Rue's heart. "Everything my father built, everything I've tried to protect. We don't know what they have. It might be nothing. Or it might be proof that my father's collection is compromised. That you and I have been maintaining stolen art. That our entire lives are built on something rotten. Don't think like that. Not until we know the facts." He turned to face her, and she saw fear in his eyes. "What if the facts are worse than the speculation? What if my father really was a thief? What if I've spent 15 years protecting a legacy that doesn't deserve protection? Then we deal with it. Together." "Do we?" His voice went cold, and Rue felt ice forming in her stomach. "Or do you deal with it by cooperating with the police, by providing evidence against the collection, by saving your career at the expense of mine? That's not fair. I would never. Wouldn't you? Think about it, Rue. Your career is on the line. You could make all of this go away by confirming their suspicions, by testifying that you discovered irregularities in the Hargrove collection, by positioning yourself as the whistleblower instead of the accomplice. You think I'd betray you? After everything we've shared? I think you're scared. I think you're facing criminal charges and professional ruin. I think survival instinct might override loyalty. The accusation hit like a physical blow. You don't trust me. I don't trust anyone. I thought I'd made that clear. Even me? Even after everything? Especially you, because you're the one who could hurt me most. Rue felt something shatter inside her chest. I see. So this is who you really are. The moment things get difficult, you assume betrayal. You push people away before they can leave. I'm protecting myself. No, you're fulfilling your own prophecy. You're so convinced that everyone will hurt you that you hurt them first. You make it impossible for anyone to stay. Then leave. If it's so impossible, if I'm so damaged, just leave. Maybe I should. Maybe I will. The words hung between them like shattered glass. Rue grabbed her jacket and keys. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall in front of him. Wait. Dashiell's voice cracked slightly. I didn't mean. Yes, you did. That's the problem. When you're scared, you mean every cruel thing you say. You weaponize people's vulnerabilities because it's easier than admitting you're terrified. I am terrified of losing everything, of being my father's son in the worst possible way, of discovering that the only thing I've protected all these years is a lie. Then trust me to help you face it. Trust that I'm on your side. How can I when you might have to choose between me and your future? Because love means choosing each other even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. She left him standing in the gallery, surrounded by art that might be stolen, protecting a legacy that might be built on lies, too afraid to reach for the one real thing he had. The drive to Portland was the longest 3 hours of Rue's life. She arrived at the precinct with 15 minutes to spare, met by the legal team who briefed her quickly on strategy. Answer questions truthfully but don't speculate. Provide facts, not interpretations. Don't let them intimidate you into admissions that aren't supported by evidence. Detective Brennan was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and an expression that gave nothing away. She led Rue and her attorney into an interrogation room that smelled like old coffee and stress. Thank you for coming, Miss Calloway. I appreciate your cooperation. I want to help however I can. Good. Let's start with the lippy painting. Walk me through your authentication process. Rue spent the next hour detailing every step she'd taken, every database she'd searched, every expert she'd consulted. The detective listened carefully, occasionally making notes, her expression unreadable. And you found no indication that the piece was looted? None. The provenance gap was noted, but there was no evidence linking it to any theft registries. Not even the Vienna records? The Vienna records weren't available in 2018. They were only recently discovered in a private archive and made public. Convenient timing. It's documented fact. My attorney's voice was firm. Miss Calloway performed due diligence with the resources available at the time. She can't be held responsible for information that didn't exist when she did her research. Detective Brennan nodded slowly. Fair enough. Let's talk about Hargrove Manor. You've been working there for 3 weeks? Yes. In that time, have you discovered any irregularities in the collection's provenance? I've noted some gaps in documentation, particularly from the World War II era. Those gaps are consistent with the historical reality of that period, when record-keeping was disrupted. But you haven't found evidence of theft? No. What about evidence of forgery? Rue's stomach clenched. Forgery? No. Why would you ask that? Detective Brennan pulled out a folder and slid a photograph across the table. Do you recognize this painting? It was one of the pieces from Dashiell's private vault. A small Renaissance work attributed to Botticelli. Yes, it's part of the Hargrove collection. We received an anonymous tip 3 days ago claiming that this painting is a forgery. A very good forgery, but a forgery nonetheless. The tipster claims to have documentation proving it was created in the 1970s and sold to Cornelius Hargrove as an original. That's impossible. I examined that piece personally. The materials, the technique, the aging, everything is consistent with 15th century origin. Are you certain? Because if you're wrong, that makes you either incompetent or complicit in fraud. I'm certain, and I resent the implication. Detective Brennan leaned forward. Miss Calloway, I'm going to be direct with you. We have evidence suggesting a pattern of fraud surrounding Cornelius Hargrove's collection. We have testimony from a former associate claiming that several pieces were knowingly acquired as forgeries or stolen property. We have financial records showing unusual transactions, and we have an anonymous source with detailed knowledge of the collection's irregularities. Who's the source? I can't reveal that. But they're credible, and their information has been accurate so far. If they're so credible, why are they anonymous? Because they fear retaliation from Dashiell Hargrove. Because they've seen what happens to people who cross him. Rue felt anger replace fear. Dashiell isn't dangerous. He's protective of his father's legacy, yes, but he's not violent or vindictive. Really? What about Victoria Caldwell? The name hit Rue like ice water. Victoria? What does she have to do with this? She's our source. Detective Brennan's voice was calm, matter of fact. She came to us 2 weeks ago with extensive documentation about irregularities in the Hargrove collection. She claims Dashiell has been threatening her to keep quiet about what she knows. That's a lie. Rue's voice shook with fury. Victoria is Dashiell's ex-fiancée. She disappeared when his inheritance was uncertain, then reappeared recently trying to manipulate him. She's not a credible source. She's a vindictive ex with an agenda, or she's someone who knows the truth and is finally brave enough to speak it. No. Rue stood abruptly. No. This whole investigation is based on lies from someone with every reason to hurt Dashiell. The Lippy painting challenge, this supposed forgery evidence, all of it is Victoria trying to destroy him. Can you prove that? Can you prove she's telling the truth? Detective Brennan studied Rue carefully. You're in love with him. That's why you're defending him so passionately. I'm defending him because I know him. Because I've spent 3 weeks examining every piece of his collection and found nothing but legitimate art and thorough documentation. Because Victoria Caldwell is a liar. The detective sighed. Miss Calloway, I understand loyalty, but loyalty to the wrong person can destroy your life. If Dashiell Hargrove is involved in fraud, if he's knowingly maintaining stolen or forged art, you don't want to go down with him. He's not. And I'm not going down because there's nothing to go down for. Then you won't mind if we get a warrant to examine the Hargrove collection? If we bring in independent experts to verify your authentication? Do what you need to do. You'll find that everything I've told you is accurate. We'll see. The interrogation continued for another hour, but Rue had nothing more to give them. She'd told the truth. Her work was solid. Victoria's accusations were lies. The investigation would prove it. At least, that's what she desperately hoped. Rue called Dashiell from her car, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. He answered on the first ring. How bad is it? It's Victoria. She's the source. She's claiming your collection contains forgeries and stolen art. She's claiming you've been threatening her. The silence on the other end was absolute. Dashiell? I'm here. His voice was hollow, defeated. I'm just not surprised. The police are getting a warrant. They're going to examine the entire collection. Let them. They won't find anything because there's nothing to find. Dashiell. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for walking out this morning. I'm sorry for not understanding how scared you were. You had every right to walk out. I accused you of betrayal when you've done nothing but support me. I pushed you away because I'm too damaged to know how to hold on to anyone. Stop. Rue's voice was fierce. Stop punishing yourself and help me figure out how to prove Victoria is lying. What if she's not lying? What if my father really did acquire forged or stolen pieces? What if everything I've believed is wrong? Then we deal with it together. But first, we prove what's true and what's not. I need you to tell me everything you know about Victoria, everything about her connection to your father, to the collection, to anything that might explain why she's doing this. Can we talk when you get back? I don't want to do this over the phone. I'm not coming back tonight. I need to stay in Portland, do some research. Talk to people who knew your father. Rue, it's not safe. If Victoria is willing to lie to the police, she's capable of anything. I'll be careful. Just trust me to do this, okay? I do trust you. That's what terrifies me. After they hung up, Rue sat in her car trying to figure out her next move. She needed information about Victoria, about Cornelius Hargrove, about the collection's history. She needed to find the truth before the lies destroyed everything. An idea struck her. The Portland Art Museum. If Victoria had been involved with Cornelius's collection, someone there might remember her, might know something useful. Rue drove to the museum and found her former colleague Marcus still working late in the archives. His face lit up when he saw her. Rue Calloway. I heard you were working for Dashiell Hargrove now. How's that going? Complicated. Marcus, I need your help. Do you remember anyone named Victoria Caldwell ever being involved with Cornelius Hargrove's acquisitions? Marcus frowned, thinking, Victoria Caldwell. Why does that name sound familiar? She was engaged to Dashiell. She might have been around during some of Cornelius's later acquisitions. Oh, wait. Marcus moved to a filing cabinet, pulling out old visitor logs. We keep records of everyone who accesses the archives. Let me check. He flipped through pages, then stopped. Here, Victoria Caldwell. She accessed the provenance files for several Renaissance pieces in 2008. She was researching for a private collector. 2008. That was a year before Cornelius died. Right. And look at this. She specifically requested files for pieces that later appeared in the Hargrove collection. She was tracking them before Cornelius acquired them. Why would she do that unless... Rue's mind raced. Unless she was helping him identify pieces to acquire. Or unless she was planning something long-term. Marcus pulled out more files. There's something else. In 2009, right after Cornelius died, Victoria tried to access his private collection records. We denied the request because she wasn't family and Dashiell hadn't authorized it. She was furious, threatened legal action. Did she follow through? No. She disappeared for a while. I heard she married someone wealthy, divorced quickly, then tried to reconnect with Dashiell a few years ago. And now she's claiming his collection is fraudulent. Rue felt pieces clicking into place. Marcus, what if Victoria helped Cornelius acquire pieces, knew exactly what was in the collection, and is now using that knowledge to destroy Dashiell? But why? What does she gain? I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Rue spent the next 3 hours combing through museum records, making phone calls to other curators, piecing together Victoria's history. What emerged was a pattern of manipulation, of targeting wealthy collectors, of involving herself in high-value acquisitions, and then leveraging that involvement for personal gain. But the smoking gun came from an unexpected source. A gallery owner in Seattle who'd worked with Victoria years ago and had nothing good to say about her. She tried to blackmail me. The gallery owner, a woman named Patricia, spoke quietly over the phone. She claimed she had evidence that I'd sold a forged piece, threatened to go public unless I paid her $50,000. I called her bluff, hired lawyers, and proved the piece was authentic. She disappeared after that. When was this? 2012. Right around the time she would have been trying to reconnect with Dashiell. Rue felt certainty crystallizing. Patricia, did she ever mention the Hargrove collection? Actually, yes. She said she'd worked with Cornelius Hargrove, that she knew things about his acquisitions that could be valuable to the right person. I assumed she was lying, trying to seem more connected than she was. What if she wasn't lying? What if she really does know things about the collection? Then whoever she's targeting now is in serious trouble. Rue thanked Patricia and hung up, her mind racing. Victoria had a pattern of using insider knowledge to blackmail and manipulate. She'd been involved with Cornelius's acquisitions. She'd tried to access collection records after his death, and now she was accusing Dashiell of fraud. It wasn't about truth. It was about leverage. But leverage for what? What did Victoria want? Rue called Dashiell back. I need you to tell me something honestly. Did Victoria ever ask you for money? Recently, I mean. Yes. 2 months ago. She said she was in financial trouble. Asked for a loan. I refused. How much did she want? $500,000. And when you refused? She got angry, said I owed her for all the years she'd stood by me, for the sacrifices she'd made. I told her she'd stood by me for exactly as long as my inheritance was secure, then disappeared. We fought. She left, threatening to make me regret it. This isn't about justice or truth. This is about money. She's trying to force you to pay her by destroying your reputation and your collection. Can we prove that? Maybe. If we can show a pattern of her using collection information to extort people, we can discredit her accusations. How do we do that? Leave that to me. Have you ever wondered what drives someone to destroy what they can't have? Have you ever seen how fear can make people cruel? Share your thoughts in the comments about revenge, manipulation, and the price of choosing vengeance over healing. The next morning, Rue met with Dashiell's legal team and presented everything she'd found. The attorneys were skeptical at first, but as she laid out Victoria's pattern of manipulation, her attempted blackmail of other collectors, her suspicious involvement with Cornelius's acquisitions, they began to see the larger picture. This is good. The lead attorney, a sharp woman named Catherine, reviewed the evidence. This is very good. It establishes motive and pattern, but we need more. We need proof that her accusations about the collection are false. I can provide that. Rue pulled out her tablet. I've completed independent authentication of every piece Victoria claimed is forged or stolen. I've cross-referenced with updated databases, consulted with international experts, and documented everything. The collection is clean. Every piece. Every piece? Catherine raised an eyebrow. You're absolutely certain? I stake my professional reputation on it. You realize that's exactly what you're doing. If you're wrong, your career is over. I'm not wrong. Catherine studied her for a long moment. Then let's prove it. The next week was a whirlwind of depositions, expert consultations, and evidence gathering. The police executed their warrant, bringing in independent experts to examine the Hargrove collection. Rue worked alongside them, providing documentation, answering questions, defending her authentication, and slowly, steadily, the truth emerged. Every piece Victoria had claimed was forged was authentic. Every piece she'd claimed was stolen had clean provenance. Her accusations were built on distortions, half-truths, and outright lies designed to pressure Dashiell into paying her off. The Lippi painting at the Portland Art Museum was more complicated. It did appear on the Vienna records, but further research revealed that the family claiming it had sold it legally in 1955. The current claimants were distant relatives trying to exploit restitution laws for financial gain. Rue's original authentication had been correct. 2 weeks after the investigation began, Detective Brennan called Rue back to the precinct. Miss Calloway, I owe you an apology. We've completed our investigation, and it's clear that Victoria Caldwell's accusations were false. We're dropping all inquiries into the Hargrove collection and your professional conduct. And Victoria, we're pursuing fraud and false reporting charges against her. She won't be bothering you or Mr. Hargrove again. Relief flooded through Rue so powerfully she felt lightheaded. Thank you. You should know, you did excellent work. Both in your original authentication and in your defense of the collection. The art world needs more curators with your integrity. After the call, Rue sat in her car and cried, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming release of weeks of fear and pressure. She'd been vindicated. Her reputation was intact. The collection was proven legitimate. She'd won. But winning felt hollow without the person she wanted to share it with. She drove back to Hargrove Manor as the sun set over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The gates opened automatically, and she pulled up to the house that had become more than just a workplace. It had become home. Dashiell was waiting on the front steps, as if he'd known the moment she'd arrive. When she got out of the car, he didn't say anything. He just pulled her into his arms and held her like she was the only real thing in his world. It's over, she whispered against his chest. We won. The collection is proven legitimate. My reputation is intact. Victoria is being charged with fraud. I know. Catherine called me an hour ago. Then why are you still holding me like you're afraid I'll disappear? Because I am afraid. Because I almost lost you. Because I pushed you away when I should have held you closer. Rue pulled back to look at him. You were scared. I understand that now. Being scared isn't an excuse for being cruel. I accused you of betrayal when you'd done nothing but fight for me. I let fear make me into exactly the kind of person I despise. So don't do it again. Learn from it. Grow from it. Choose differently next time. What if there is a next time? What if I always fall back into those patterns? Then I'll call you on it. And you'll apologize. And we'll keep trying. That's what love is, Dashiell. It's not being perfect. It's being willing to fail and try again. How did you get so wise? Desperation and stubbornness in equal measure. He laughed then, a real laugh that transformed his face. I love you, Rue Calloway. I love your integrity and your courage and your absolutely terrifying honesty. I love that you took a job nobody wanted and turned it into something that saved us both. I love you too. Even when you're impossible, maybe especially then. They stood on the steps of Hargrove Manor as darkness fell, holding each other like they'd discovered something precious worth protecting. The investigation was over, but their story was just beginning. 3 months later, Rue stood in the gallery wearing a dress that cost more than her first car, greeting guests arriving for the official unveiling of the Hargrove Collection's new public exhibition wing. It had been Dashiell's idea. Instead of keeping the collection locked away, accessible only to a privileged few, he'd decided to share it, to let people see the art his father had spent a lifetime gathering. To honor both his parents' legacy by combining preservation with accessibility, the exhibition was already being called one of the most significant private collections ever opened to public viewing. But for Rue, the real transformation wasn't in the art. It was in the man standing beside her, greeting guests with genuine warmth instead of cold courtesy. Dashiell had changed. Not overnight, not perfectly, but steadily. He'd started therapy to address the trauma of losing both parents. He'd reconnected with old friends he'd pushed away. He'd learned to let people close without waiting for them to leave. And he'd asked Rue to marry him. The proposal had been private, just the two of them in the conservatory where they'd first admitted their feelings. No grand gestures, no expensive rings, just a simple question. Will you spend your life with me, helping me become the person I'm meant to be? She'd said yes without hesitation. Now, watching him laugh with museum directors and art enthusiasts, seeing him passionate about sharing beauty instead of hoarding it, Rue felt gratitude so deep it threatened to overwhelm her. She'd taken the most dangerous job at the feared billionaire's house, and her life had changed completely. Not because of money or status or security, but because she'd been brave enough to see past fear to the person underneath. Because she'd chosen honesty over safety. Because she'd believed that broken people could heal if they found someone willing to be patient. Iris appeared at her elbow, looking elegant in a navy dress. Quite a turnout, Miss Calloway. Or should I start calling you Mrs. Hargrove? Not for another 3 months, but you can call me Rue. I don't think I can. Old habits. But Iris smiled, something rare and genuine. I'm glad he found you. I was beginning to think he'd spend his whole life alone in this beautiful prison. He almost did. We both almost did. What changed? We chose each other over our fear. We chose risk over safety. We chose to believe that love is worth the possibility of pain. That's a brave choice. It's the only choice that matters. As the evening progressed, Rue watched Dashiell give a speech about his father's legacy, about art as a bridge between past and present, about the importance of sharing beauty rather than hoarding it. His voice was strong, confident, touched with emotion when he mentioned his mother. But when his eyes found Rue in the crowd, they softened with something that transcended words. There's one more person I need to thank. Dashiell's voice carried through the gallery. 3 months ago, a woman took a job that 6 people before her had fled from. She walked into a house that felt more like a tomb than a home. She worked for a man who'd spent 15 years convinced that isolation was safety. The crowd laughed softly. That woman refused to accept my version of reality. She demanded better. She saw through every defense I'd constructed and found something worth salvaging underneath. She took the most dangerous job of her life, and in doing so, she saved mine. He moved through the crowd toward her, and Rue felt tears threatening. Rue Calloway believed that people can change, that broken things can be repaired, that love is stronger than fear. And because she believed it, I started to believe it too. This collection, this exhibition, this entire evening exists because she refused to let me hide anymore. He took her hand, pulling her to the front of the room. So while you're all here admiring Renaissance masters and contemporary provocateurs, I'd like you to also admire the woman who taught me that the greatest art isn't what we create or preserve. It's how we love each other, how we choose courage over fear, how we build lives that honor both our past and our future. The crowd applauded, but Rue barely heard it. She was lost in Dashiell's eyes, seeing the man he'd become, grateful for the journey that had brought them both here. Later, after the guests had gone and the catering staff had cleaned up, Rue and Dashiell stood alone in the gallery, surrounded by art that had witnessed their transformation. Thank you for that speech. Rue leaned against his shoulder. Though you might have laid it on a bit thick. I meant every word, Without you, I'd still be alone in this house, protecting a legacy instead of living a life. Without you, I'd be struggling to pay rent and wondering if my career was over before it really began. So we saved each other. We did. Dashiell turned to face her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. I want to ask you something. We're already engaged. What more could you possibly ask? I want to know if you're happy. Truly happy. Not just surviving or making the best of things, but actually living the life you dreamed of. Rue considered the question seriously. A year ago, I was desperate. I would have taken any job, accepted any circumstances, just to survive. I thought happiness was something other people got to have. And now? Now I wake up every morning in a house I love, doing work that challenges me, with a man who sees me as I really am and loves me anyway. Now I get to share beauty with thousands of people, instead of hoarding it for one. Now I'm building a future instead of just surviving the present. She reached up to touch his face. So yes, Dashiell Hargrove, I'm happy. I'm living the best days of my life. Every single day with you is the best day of my life. Even when I'm being impossible, especially then. Because impossible Dashiell is still my Dashiell. They kissed in the empty gallery, surrounded by centuries of human creativity and beauty, adding their own small masterpiece to the collection. Not a painting or sculpture, but a love that had survived fear and doubt and the desperate need for control. A love built on honesty and courage and the willingness to keep trying even when failure seemed certain. As they left the gallery, turning off lights and locking doors, Rue looked back at the space one more time. She thought about the desperate woman who'd walked through those doors 3 months ago, willing to take any risk for a chance at survival. That woman would barely recognize the person Rue had become, confident, valued, loved beyond measure. The most dangerous job of her life had given her everything she'd never dared to dream of. Sometimes the greatest rewards come from the greatest risks. Sometimes walking into the lion's den is exactly what you need to discover your own strength. Sometimes the person everyone fears is just someone who's forgotten how to hope. And sometimes, love really is enough to transform everything. 1 year later, the transformation of Hargrove Manor was complete. What had once been a fortress of isolation had become a thriving center of art, education, and community engagement. The exhibition wing hosted rotating displays. The conservatory had been converted into a music education space, and the grounds regularly welcomed school groups and art students. Rue Hargrove, the name still made her smile, stood in what had once been her small room in the West Wing. It was being converted into an office for the foundation she and Dashiell had established. The Cornelius and Catherine Hargrove Foundation for Art Education, dedicated to making art accessible to everyone regardless of economic circumstance. The foundation funded scholarships, supported underfunded museum programs, and helped families like Rue's own access culture and beauty that had once seemed impossibly distant. Rue. Dashiell appeared in the doorway, looking younger and more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. There's someone here to see you. Who? Come see for yourself. Rue followed him downstairs to find her mother standing in the foyer, tears streaming down her face. The MS had progressed, requiring a wheelchair now, but her eyes were bright with joy. Mom! Rue rushed to embrace her. You're here. You're really here. The marshals finally agreed it was safe. Her mother's voice shook with emotion. They said the trial is over, the threat is gone, and I can have my life back. I can have my daughter back. They held each other while Dashiell discreetly disappeared, giving them privacy for a reunion 15 months in the making. This house. Rue's mother looked around in wonder. This is where you've been living? This is home now. Come on, let me show you everything. Rue spent the afternoon giving her mother a tour, sharing stories about the collection, the investigation, the transformation of both the house and her life. Her mother listened with a mixture of pride and amazement. You did all this. You helped create all this. Dashiell created it. I just helped him remember why beauty matters. No, baby, you created it together. That's what partnership is. Later, over dinner in the conservatory, with music students practicing in the background, Dashiell officially met Rue's mother. The conversation was warm, easy, full of stories about Rue's childhood and Dashiell's plans for the foundation. Watching them together, seeing the two people she loved most, connecting and laughing, Rue felt something unlock in her chest. This was what family felt like. Not blood or obligation, but choice. People coming together because they wanted to, because they valued each other, because love was enough reason. After dinner, Dashiell excused himself to check on the music students, leaving Rue and her mother alone. He's a good man. Her mother reached across the table to take Rue's hand. Damaged, but good. You chose well. I got lucky. No. You got brave. There's a difference. Her mother's expression grew serious. When you called me from that employment office, told me about this job, I was terrified. I'd heard the stories about Dashiell Hargrove. I thought you were walking into something that would break you. I almost did break, more than once. But you didn't. You stayed. You fought. You chose to see the person underneath the reputation, and in doing so, you saved both of you. I don't know if I saved him. I think we saved each other. That's the best kind of love, the kind where both people become more than they were alone. As the sun set over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Rue walked her mother to the guest suite that had been prepared. Magnus had installed ramps and grab bars, making sure everything was accessible. This is too much, her mother's voice wavered. You don't have to. You're staying as long as you want. This is your home now too, if you want it to be. They embraced again, holding tight, making up for 15 months of separation. That night, Rue found Dashiell in the gallery, standing before the painting of the shipwreck that had started so many conversations between them. Thinking about your father? Actually, I was thinking about how far we've come. A year ago, I was alone in this gallery, convinced that isolation was the only way to survive. Now this space is full of people every day. Students, visitors, families, life. Do you regret it? Opening everything up? Not for a second. My father spent 40 years gathering beauty and hiding it away. My mother would have wanted it shared. I was honoring the wrong parent's legacy. You honored them both by finding balance, preservation and accessibility, protection and generosity. Dashiell pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. How did you get so wise? I learned from someone who taught me that excellence matters, but so does connection. That protecting what's precious is important, but so is sharing it. That the best way to honor the past is to create a better future. I never taught you that. Yes, you did. By learning it yourself. By changing. By choosing courage over fear. They stood in the gallery, holding each other as evening deepened into night. Through the windows, they could see lights from the education wing, hear faint music from the conservatory, sense the life that now filled every corner of the estate. Are you happy? Rue asked the question he'd asked her months ago. I'm living the best days of my life. Every day with you, every choice we make together, every time I see this house full of life instead of ghosts. Yes, I'm happy. For the first time in 15 years, I'm genuinely, completely happy. Even when I'm being stubborn, especially then. Because stubborn Rue is still my Rue. She laughed, the sound echoing through the gallery. We're quite a pair. Two broken people who found each other and decided broken was just another word for human. And human is beautiful. Yes, it is. If you've stayed with this story to the very end, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment telling me which moment touched you most. Was it when Rue first stood up to Dashiell, when he admitted his fear, when they chose each other despite everything working against them? Let me know in the comments. And if this story moved you, if it made you think about your own courage, your own fear, your own capacity for love, do me a favor. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear that broken people can heal, that taking risks can lead to rewards, that love is worth choosing even when it's terrifying. Subscribe if you haven't already, because I have another incredible story coming tomorrow. It's about second chances and the courage to forgive. About choosing hope over bitterness, and you absolutely don't want to miss it. Epilogue, 5 years later. The Hargrove Foundation's 5th anniversary gala was in full swing. The manor transformed into a celebration of everything Rue and Dashiell had built together. Hundreds of guests filled the grounds. Former scholarship recipients, now successful artists, students whose lives had been changed by access to programs the foundation funded, families who discovered that beauty wasn't just for the wealthy. Rue stood at the edge of the crowd, watching Dashiell speak with a young painter whose college education the foundation had sponsored. His face was animated, passionate, so different from the cold mask he'd worn when they first met. "Penny for your thoughts?" Iris appeared beside her, looking elegant as always, but with warmth in her expression that hadn't existed 5 years ago. "I was just thinking about how much can change when people choose courage over fear." "Indeed," Iris smiled. "I've worked for the Hargrove family for 30 years. I watched Cornelius pour his heart into that collection. I watched Catherine bring life to this house. I watched Dashiell retreat into isolation after they died, and I watched you bring him back to life. I didn't do it alone. He chose to change. That was the hardest part. But you gave him a reason to choose. That matters." Through the crowd, Rue spotted her mother in her wheelchair, laughing with Magnus about something. Her mother's MS had progressed, but her spirit remained undiminished. She'd moved into the manor permanently 2 years ago, becoming an integral part of the foundation's work, sharing her own story with families facing medical challenges. And there, playing in the gardens under the supervision of a nanny, were 2 children. Twins, 3 years old, with Dashiell's dark hair and Rue's determination. Catherine and Cornelius Hargrove, the second generation, named for grandparents they'd never meet but whose legacy they'd carry forward. Dashiell found her in the crowd, their eyes meeting across the distance. He excused himself from his conversation and made his way to her, pulling her into his arms. "Have I told you today that you're extraordinary?" "Only twice. You're slipping. I'll have to remedy that." He kissed her forehead. "Thank you for this. All of this. For taking a job nobody wanted and turning it into something that's changed hundreds of lives. Thank you for being brave enough to let me try." They watched their children play, watched the sun set over the Pacific, watched people from all walks of life gather to celebrate art and beauty and the power of accessibility. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Dashiell asked. "When you walked into the kitchen and I was my absolute worst self." "Every day. I think about how close I came to walking away. How close we both came to missing this. What stopped you?" "Desperation at first. Then curiosity. Then hope. Then love." "In that order?" "In exactly that order." He laughed, the sound rich and full. "I love you, Rue Hargrove. I love the life we've built, the family we've created, the future we're making together. I love you too, even when you're being impossible. Especially then. Especially then." As darkness fell and lights illuminated the gardens, as music filled the air and children's laughter mixed with adult conversation, as the house that had once been a tomb became a sanctuary of life and love and possibility, Rue allowed herself a moment of pure gratitude. She'd taken the most dangerous job at the feared billionaire's house. She'd walked into isolation and brought connection. She'd faced fear and chosen courage. She'd risked everything for the possibility of something real. And she'd discovered that sometimes the greatest dangers lead to the greatest rewards. That broken people can heal. That love is stronger than fear. That choosing vulnerability over protection is the bravest thing anyone can do. The best days of her life had started with a desperate gamble and had become a beautiful reality. Every morning brought new challenges, new joys, new moments of grace that made every risk worthwhile. And somewhere, she liked to imagine, Cornelius and Catherine Hargrove were watching their son finally living instead of just surviving. Finally sharing beauty instead of hoarding it, finally loving without fear. The ice had melted completely, replaced by warmth that touched everyone who entered Hargrove Manor. And the woman who'd melted it, who'd refused to accept that some people were too broken to heal, stood surrounded by the life she'd helped create and knew that taking impossible risks was how miracles happened. Thank you for staying with Rue and Dashiell's story until the very end. If this journey moved you, if it made you think differently about courage and fear, about taking risks and choosing love, let me know in the comments. Tell me what spoke to your heart. And please, hit that like button and subscribe to Cedar Drama. Tomorrow brings a new story about redemption, about the courage to forgive yourself, about second chances that change everything. You won't want to miss it. Click on the next video appearing on your screen right now. Let's continue this journey together. See you there.